This video is sponsored by Frontline Gaming and their Black Friday sale. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. At the time of recording, I am on my way back from the Standoff GT, where I streamed 5 games of Warhammer 40k over the course of the weekend. Please go check out my video coverage. I'm going to drop a link to that in the video description, and I'll be discussing the final lists from that event that went undefeated, both of which I live streamed over the course of several games, both on my main viewer as well as on my members-only recorded games that you can get access to by joining a channel membership. But otherwise, this was a fairly big weekend for Warhammer 40k, with a lot of larger GT-sized events going down. Generally speaking, 5-round events with large numbers of players that had multiple undefeated. So we're going to see a lot of duplicate listings as we move on to the Metagame Breakdown. Now, immediately, we can see the impact of the newly released Victrix Honor Guard for Ultramarines. This new unit, I think, understandably has catapulted Ultramarines into the absolute cutting edge of the meta. An incredibly strong addition to the Space Marine faction, a faction that was already doing fairly well with archetypes like Shadow Mark Talon for Raven Guard. Ultramarines now looks like are becoming one of the strongest archetypes in the game. We'll see if that will get toned down as anti-Victrix Honor Guard technology gets produced, but they did go undefeated at the Fantasia Fanatic 48, Hive City Rumble GT, 4th Hammer Down Breast Cancer, and Celtic Cup Grand Tournament. We also see Astra Militarum coming out of the woodwork with several undefeated results. That at the Mugu Games Store Championship, Alba GT, and Canis Belli War. Chaos Knights also doing fairly well at the Fantasia Fanatic 48, as well as, interestingly, at the Bolters and Biomass End of Year GT. Adeptus Custodes, as I mentioned before, an interesting Adeptus Custodes list using largely Vehicle Solar Spearhead, went undefeated at the Standoff this weekend. I did live stream that in the first round of the event, and I do have several recorded games that are being posted to the channel shortly featuring that list. We also saw a more standard Lions of the Emperor list take down the Gravel Pit number 4. Necrons had 2 undefeated results at the 4th Hammer Down Breast Cancer, as well as the Outriders MKGT. Chaos Space Marines won the 2nd City Games GT with a very old school archetype of list. I'm very excited that is making a comeback. Adepta Sororitas also undefeated at the Standoff. I actually live streamed that winning list several times over the weekend. Raven Guard took down the Hobart GT with the Shadow Mark Talon. Dark Angels taking down the Renegade Open 2025 with a bizarre biker-focused Ravenwing list. Excited to see that. Renegade Open had 3 undefeated at the end of its 5 rounds. So we also saw Chaos Demons and Adeptus Mechanicus taking down undefeated records from that event. Death Guard also undefeated at the Gravel Pit number 4. Orks winning Cross Sword War at the Westward 9. Tyranids taking down the Alba GT. Drukhari, another undefeated result from the Canis Belli War. And last, but certainly not least, Deathwatch at the AZ40K League Fall Championship. It was actually a 7-round event. Deathwatch took that one down 7-0 with a crazy horde style of kill team build. Let's talk about these lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Frontline Gaming and their new set of tournament-ready terrain sets. At the time of recording, Frontline Gaming is currently running a Black Friday sale. It's only available for about a week until December 1st. So everything we talk about in this video is going to be found at up to 35% off at store.frontlinegaming.org. You'll find their official accessories at 35% off, and you'll find their terrain and game mats at 25% off with a 25% discount on their second-hand miniature shop as well. But that also includes their new sets of tournament-ready terrain, which is available in several different designs, including a very cool Necron-themed one. These terrain sets are essentially ready to play out of the box with no additional accessories. What I mean by that is that they also include objective markers and deployment zone markers built into the kit, so you need literally nothing else to play right out of this box. The sets feature highly detailed artwork and are easy to assemble, and are compatible with a wide variety of competitive terrain formats from WTC to Chapter Approved 2025. So check out store.frontlinegaming.org to get these discounts today. And big thanks to Frontline Gaming for sponsoring this video. Now back to the content. So starting with the Fantasia Fanatic 48, I'm going to move over to Sampa Orhanen's list, running Blade of Ultramar. This is the brand new Ultramarines detachment specific to that chapter. It trades some of the normal combat tricks you would have from something like a Gladius Task Force for instead a -1 to wound effect and the ability to duplicate your combat doctrines that allows you to stay in Assault or Devastator doctrine for most of the game, while all the time giving your large, heavy vehicles a form of -1 to wound. Now, in this case, we are taking Captain Sicarius, Marneus Calgar, and Uriel Ventress. Sicarius can attach into, this is the new Sicarius datasheet, he can attach into a Victrix Honor Guard squad and give it a reactive move, in addition to being a hard hitter himself. Marneus Calgar obviously needs no introduction, and then Uriel Ventress is going to be able to potentially deep strike himself or another unit, and then grant a command point tax aura. There is a company hero squad that's most likely going to include Uriel Ventress, so he can push forward and project that aura up into obnoxious areas of the table. We then have a bunch of Victrix Honor Guard, one for each of those attaching characters, one for Sicarius, one for Marneus Calgar, 2 units of 6 there, one of them obviously with the Ancient and Banner of Macrags for additional damage output. We have an Intercessor squad to hold the backline, 1 Combi Lieutenant to act as utility, an Impulsor, which can carry around either the 7 model Victrix Honor Guard squad, so that's 1 captain alongside the 6 Victrix Honor Guard, or it can carry around the company hero squad, potentially 2, and then we could also be using the Deep Strike effect from Uriel Ventress to then Rapid Ingress one of these Victrix Honor Guard units to get it stuck in later on. Multiple options there to try to deliver these squads. We do have an Incursor squad for some additional utility, 3 Redemptor Dreadnoughts, and a Stormspeeder Hammerstrike, in addition to a Scout Squad. So the Redemptor Dreadnoughts are going to form an incredibly resilient front line. They have access to -1 to be wounded, in addition to -1 AP and -1 damage. So you can stack all of those defensive benefits the entire time. They also benefit very exceptionally from Devastator Doctrine because they're relatively slow at a baseline, but with the ability to advance and shoot, they can get lines of fire early. You also, obviously, being an Ultramarines, you get the up-powered Oaths of Moment, so the middling strength on their plasma cannons is actually offset pretty reasonably. And then you do still have Lance available to the Victrix Honor Guard to punch things in melee. So you don't necessarily need Rabuta Gilliman for the double Oath. You can use it, because it is very effective. But, obviously, the Victrix Honor Guard are going to be hitting at 2s, winning most things on 4s or 5s with 1,000,000 2-damage attacks by themselves, and then you can just pile drive something down with the Redemptor Dreadnoughts. Trade fire with your -1 to be wounded strat and keep those guys alive for as long as possible. Very straightforward build for Blade of Ultramar, but definitely offers this interesting kind of combined arms style of play where you're taking the big heavy vehicles that can be even more resilient in this detachment than other similar vehicle-focused Space Marine builds, while having access to this incredibly strong melee counter threat from the Victrix Honor Guard. So it just kind of a match made in heaven there. From there, we're going to move on over to Astra Militarum. We're going to go down to the Canis Belli War. This one was won by Florian Sauter, who is running Hammer of the Emperor. This is the vehicle-focused detachment, speaking of vehicle detachments, where you're able to advance farther distances and travel through models when you do so. This list was playing Gaunt's Ghosts, interestingly, a Krieg command squad in addition to a pair of Rogel Dorn commanders, one of them with Calm Under Fire, that allows it to duplicate orders in addition to one with Veteran Crew for the additional reroll 1s. We have 2 Tech Priest Engineers to keep those guys alive, in addition to a Cadian Shock Trooper unit, a Catachan Jungle Fighter squad. We have a Chimera as well as a Torox. For utility, we're bringing a small unit of Attilan Rough Riders, a pair of Hellhounds to strip cover from enemies, in addition to a bunch of Leman Russ, a Punisher, Double Vanquisher, as well as a Scout Sentinel to get access to reroll 1s. We do have a Krieg Combat Engineer unit, which can attach the Krieg Command Squad, although I do believe it actually does strip their scout off when you do so. Big thing here, though, is that we're going to be able to force the transports up the table early if we do attach scouting units into them, and then use move to extend their movement even farther. The Torox can then disembark at the end of that. If you do put the Krieg Combat Engineers in there and don't attach them, they can scout the transport, advance the transport auto 6 with +3 from the move from a Rogel Dorn commander, drop the Metacrete Combat Engineers and actually essentially use them to screed out really far up the table. Oftentimes we see this with Castrican squads, but that's not what we're running in this particular build, instead focusing more heavily on the battle tanks themselves. Moving on from there, we're going to talk about some Chaos Knights and a fascinating list from the Bolters and Biomass end of year GT. Now, normally we've been seeing a lot of Knight Despoiler focused Infernal Lances, but Ratnu Vaidya has actually elected to take something entirely different, this being an Iconoclast Fiefdom. This is the detachment that allows you to take damned units out of Chaos Space Marines, so the cultists and mutants, and use them to essentially Dark Pact your own Chaos Knights in exchange for mortal wounds taken from your damned units. In this case, you're running 2 Knight Despoilers, both of them running double Despoiler Gatling Cannon, as well as Ruined Spear Rocket Pods, Dark Flamers on their sub-attachments. We have Profane Altar on one of them, which gives you both lethal and sustained hits on all of your attacks as long as you use your Dark Pact effect. However, it always inflicts the maximum damage. So potentially up to 6 mortal wounds to the damned unit that you are sacrificing in order to empower this guy's weapons. However, gaining both sustained and lethal on a guy that shoots 36 times plus all of his smaller shots is an insane improvement in output. We also have another Knight Despoiler with Pave the Way, which allows you to scout up to 3 damned units from your army. In this case, we are running Mass Chaos Cultists. Those guys do have an objective secure effect, so scouting them up onto objectives in the midboard and then obsecking those objectives, forcing your opponent to move forward to decontrol them and just walk into line of sight of the Knight Despoilers is super helpful. Also helps you kind of deploy those cultists in aggressive positions and then take advantage of midboard terrain features so you can use them for scoring. And this list is going to be incredibly scoring-centric. In addition to 50 Chaos Cultists, it's running 2 Beasts of Nurgle, as well as 3 units of 3 Nurglings and Rodigus. So Rodigus is going to reduce the OC characteristic of nearby enemies. You can also sort of combine that with the mass OC1 you get from Chaos Cultists surrounding him. Nurglings can move and block enemies or perform maneuver secondaries with Deep Strike. Beasts of Nurgle are additional scouts, so you're going to be scouting a total of 5 units, the 2 Beasts of Nurgles plus the 3 Chaos mobs, cultist mobs. We then have 3 Warlock Carnivores for some melee counterpunch as well. And there are some interesting strategies we can use in this detachment. I think one of the more interesting ones. First of all, we do have a advance, fall back, and shoot, which is a hugely powerful stratagem for the Chaos Knights to be able to use. We could also use Preserve the Idols to reactive move your Chaos Cultists that are nearby Knights that you move near. And that allows you to, again, sort of play a scoring game where you can constantly be repositioning these Chaos Cultists around the battlefield in order to disrupt your opponent's scoring. And then also being able to give things like your Carnivore sustained hits in melee, then a Despoiler sustained or lethal, depending on what they're shooting at, by sacrificing those cultists is a huge improvement. Essentially equivalent to the damage output improvement that you get from Infernal Lance Malefic Surges. A little bit of additional upside on the Profane Altar Knight. Downside being, of course, that you don't have access to ignore cover in this detachment, but you do have an advance and shoot on a stick. So it's probably a little bit of a side grade to this, the effects that you get out of Malefic Surging. So extremely interesting build. Not a detachment that we've seen have competitive success in a really long time. And definitely makes sense that it is effective in this case. From there, let's move on to the first of the lists that I did live stream over the course of the weekend. We're going to move to the Standoff GT and talk about some Adeptus Custodes. Now, this was Cheng Chen, who took second place at the event with a 5-0 record running a Solar Spearhead. That's the vehicle-focused detachment and dreadnought-focused detachment. In this case, it's only led by 2 Telamon Heavy Dreadnoughts. There are, in fact, no Custodian infantry in this army at all, only Anathema Psychana. That takes the form of 2 Prosecutor units and 2 Witch Seeker units just to perform utility roles. Everything else in the army is a big stompy robot or a tank. So the Telamon Heavy Dreadnoughts do gain the character keyword in this detachment, up to 2 of them. One of them is taking Augury Uplink for a 5+ Feel No Pain. The other one, the Offensive Improvement Adamantine Talisman. So we have a punchy Telamon Dreadnought and a resilient Telamon Dreadnought. Those guys basically get a bully up the middle of the table, especially that Augury Uplink guy is incredibly difficult to kill, banking a -1 to wound effect effect from the detachment, in addition to a 5+ field up and -1 damage. So very similar defensive profiles to what we were talking about earlier with Space Marines. In this case, the Adamantine Talisman guy, because we were trying to send that Adamantine Talisman offensive bonus as far as possible, he was taking 2 Cestises in order to punch harder. The other Telamon Dreadnought is taking an Arachnus Storm Cannon, so a devastating wound, multi-shot gun. We then have 3 Caladius Grav Tanks, all of those with the heavy blaze cannons, alongside a Contemptor Achilles for a little bit of additional damage output, plus 3 Venerable Contemptor Dreadnoughts. How this army played typically is it does have a lot of utility with the 4 units just running around the sides of Sisters of Silence, but you can also bully the center of the table very effectively. The event used fairly defensive layouts. It used layout 8 and layout 1, so there's a lot of staging area for things like the Venerable Contemptors to hide behind on turn 1, and then push up into the middle of the table turn 2 onwards. And so a lot of times what this army could do is basically just put all 5 Contemptors in the center of the table, or excuse me, all 6 Dreadnoughts in the center of the table, Contemptor Achilles, 3 Venerable Contemptors, plus 2 Telamon Heavy Dreadnoughts. Force your opponent to deal with them all at the same time you can expose your Caladius Grav Tanks, and you basically just threat overload to the extreme. If your opponent has single targets, the Caladius Grav Tanks are incredibly good at killing them. If they do have like a high volume, it is a little bit tougher to get rid of a lot of individual infantry, but you do have so many attacks. You have Marshal Kataz in melee from the Venerable Contemptors, plus all of them have some amount of sort of infantry sweeping. We do have some number of bolt guns on the Venerable Contemptors, plus the plasma projectors on the Telamon Heavy Dreadnoughts and their Spiculous bolt launchers. So there is a little bit of infantry clearing available to the list, but a lot of times what it will do is simply trade the very resilient Custodian Dreadnoughts for additional time shooting the Caladius Grav Tanks, clear out all of your vehicles and your anti-armor tech, and then basically roll the game out from there. So extremely interesting build from Adeptus Custodes. That moves us on to Necrons. We're going to talk about the Outriders MKGT. Necrons also winning the 4th Hammer Down Breast Cancer. That was a slightly more standard Star Shader arsenal. But at the Outriders GT, Matthew Putney was able to win with a Awakened Dynasty. And this was an interesting one that focused a lot on destroyers and Catan Shards, not something we typically see. This includes a Catan Shard of the Nightbringer and Void Dragon, 2 Hexmark Destroyers, and a bunch of characters. Illuminor Seraz, so we have a 4+ Field Outband guy in the middle, plus a Scorpic Lord with the Nagic Durable Bond, so another access to a extremely hyper-resilient character. We have a Locust Lord with Veil of Darkness, so that's the Destroyer, the Flying Destroyer Lord, with the ability to up-down himself, so he can reposition around the battlefield. A Technomancer with Netherrealm Casket, so the -1 to hit effect. We do have a Reanimator, so we can try to keep that unit topped up. There is a unit of Canoptic Wraiths for the Technomancer to hang out with. And then a bunch of utility. 2 units of Scarab Swarms. They could get +1 OC for being near Cryptex. Either Illuminor Seraz or the Technomancer both trigger that. We also have a Flayed 1 unit and a Deathmark unit. No attachments for the Scorpic Lord whatsoever, so he's going to be vibing. And also no utility, or no, battle line units for Illuminor Seraz to buff with his aura as well. So he's just there as an extremely solid data sheet on his own. However, we then have a unit of 3 Locust Heavy Destroyers with Enitic Exterminators, so the multi-shot anti-infantry weapon that then gains sustained hits and critical 5-ups thanks to the Locust Lord. And this guy can be an incredibly annoying disruption piece because you're able to Veil of Darkness in the back. It's only 4 bases to try to fit into a position, and then you can shoot massive number of 5-up critical sustained attacks into infantry squads potentially and clear out your opponent's backline scoring. So you're really bullying the center of the table with the Catan Shards and all of the regenerating characters, plus the Canoptic Wraiths. And then you have these little units like the Locust Heavy Destroyers that can hop around the back, clear out your opponent's backline, and sort of sandwich them into an annoying spot in the middle. Really bizarre list. Very different than we typically see from these very sort of straight up, more standard varieties of Necrons that are trying to take Doomsday Arcs and shoot you to death. This one is essentially trying to just toilet bowl the game into a huge number of some of the most resilient models in the game in the center of the battlefield. Now with that, we're going to move on to factions that only had a single undefeated result. And at this point, we're going to move over to Second City Games GT. This was won by Lucas Wilson running Chaos Space Marines, and a very cool list that I absolutely loved, a Pact-Bound Zealots build that's featuring Vashtor the Archifane. Now, Pact-Bound Zealots, the classic detachment that allows you to mark your Chaos Space Marine units, give them particular bonuses when they Dark Pact for either lethal or sustain in melee or in shooting. In this case, it is a classic Hellbrute combo. It's actually just basically the most basic Hellbrute combo you could imagine. However, it now also has the benefit of having Vashtor the Archifane. This may be one of the highest damage output gun lines that 40k has to offer. Some of these units could do absolutely incredibly ludicrous damage. The reason for that is that we can gain reroll hits from Abaddon within 6 inches. We then Dark Pact for sustained hits and shooting with a Mark of Nurgle, a marked vehicle. If it's a demon vehicle, so a Venom Crawler or a Forge Fiend, it gets +2 strength from Vashtor. So we could potentially be going up to strength 12 on the Forge Fiends. The Mark of Nurgle grants you critical 5-ups on sustained hits. If you are next to a Hellbrow, you also gain lethal hits as well. So you have a strength bonus, full hit rerolls that you're rerolling into lethal and sustain on potentially devastating wound attacks. And in most cases, the combination of those effects essentially allows these vehicles, the heavier vehicles here, the Chaos Vindicator, or the Forge Fiends if they roll high enough on their shots, to basically kill anything in the game. There are 2 Venom Crawlers here as well, which are much more sort of medium infantry sweepers. They have a bunch of 2 damage attacks. But with that combo active, they can do damage to basically anything they want. So you can start to trade up with those guys into heavier targets as well. So with their powers combined, a couple of Venom Crawlers will start to actually kill vehicles with their Excruciator cannons. We then have Cultist Mob for backline. We have a pair of Predator Destructors to fill out the ranged loadout very nicely. We have 1 Vindicator, double Forge Fiend, double Venom Crawler, and the Hellbrute. To hold down the line and to actually preserve the gun line for as long as possible, we have some allied units. That includes a pair of Nurgling Swarms, just 3 Nurglings in each, to try to block off movement down the center of the table early, as well as Rodigus. Now, obviously, this list is incredibly dangerous if you just walk into its line of sight. What you can do, obviously, is try to play around this damage output. However, it does late game pretty hard. If you do enter an attrition fight with it, both Abaddon the Spoiler and Vashtor the Archifane are both incredibly high damage units independently, and so they are just going to be able to sort of come in after the battle is joined and clean up after Rodigus has his way with you. Now, from there, we're going to move back over to the standoff, talk about Adepta Sororitas that actually ended up winning the event in an insane 1-point game for the grand finals. Incredibly bizarre game. You can check that out on my live stream. But this is Alex Ng, who is running Champions of Faith, the Celestian themed detachment. In this case, we're running the Demonifuge, Junith Eruita, Morvenval, and a trio of Hospitalers. One of them has the Sanctified Amulet to be an anti-deep strike aura. Another one with the Triptych of Judgment to ignore modifiers on that unit. Demonifuge in there as a nice little rapid ingress deep strike threat with fights first. There's also a little bit of a sub-theme of mortal wound output in this army, which is kind of interesting. There are 30 Celestian Sacrosants that go with the Hospitalers. They get -1 to be wounded. There's a -1 to hit stratagem in the detachment, in addition to a feel no pain, and if you don't kill them, they start to regenerate D3+1 models a turn. So incredibly resilient bricks of sisters. We have a Dominion squad with flamers, 3 Retributor squads to come in the late game after you start killing the front line of the sisters army, and then they get their +1 to hit and wound against units that have destroyed you earlier. We have a Sanctifier unit, so another scouting unit that can join the battle alongside Paragon Warsuit unit for Morvenval, an Immolator, a Rhino, and here's the spice, double Navigators, which is actually kind of interesting. So between them and the Sanctified Amulet, there are 3 Omni-Scrambler auras in this list. The other thing, too, is that the Navigators and Ephrael Stern have basically identical abilities. They force a battle shock check on enemies in the shooting phase. If they fail it, they suffer 3 mortal wounds. So you could potentially be dealing 9 mortal wounds, plus a grenade in the shooting phase. So on average, around 12 mortal wounds from this army, if you target units that are susceptible. The Navigators force a penalty on the battle shock check against infantry. Demonifuge does it against chaos units. But the other thing, too, is that this army becomes incredibly resilient to builds like Shadowmark Talon. And in this case, Alex is actually building to fight Chaos Demons because there's another very strong Chaos Demon player that he expected to play. They actually played in the semifinals. And so having mass numbers of Omni-Scrambler auras could actually screen out a lot of the backline for the list and not require it to keep too many of its units in the back to screen. You could just do so with the 2 Navigators to be largely immune to a lot of that, sort of close deep strike effects. And then you can also preserve the Hospitalers inside the Celestian Sacrosant units as well. So you can string the Hospitaler back into a ruin to keep it out of line of sight so it can't be precisioned, and then you can protect any deep striking units that can try to get those precision attacks in around the corners with the navigators, which keeps that bunker of hospitalers safe and essentially keeps you regenerating Celestian Sacrosants onto the midboard objectives and allows you to push your primary score really high. So, very interesting build. The most navigators I've seen on the table in months and months, but clearly they ended up doing pretty well. And there is a lot of deep striking in the meta right now, and especially with things like Uriel Ventress coming back in a big way. That might be something that we continue to see. Speaking of, let's talk about Raven Guard. They took down the Hobart GT 2025. This is Cat Trakis, who went undefeated with the Shadowmark Talon. This included Aethan Sean plus Caven Shrike, in addition to a Hunter's Instinct jump pad captain and a combi weapon lieutenant. We do have, interestingly, attachment units for both Caven Shrike and the jump pad captain. However, one of them is an Assault Intercessor unit, so we're going to be putting one of the captains in there. Probably Caven Shrike, if I had to hazard a guess, in order to give them a little bit of additional threat range with that Phobos buff. But that allows you to get a massive number of OC2 infantry onto objectives, so it certainly helps the objective control game over the more frequently seen Vanguard Veteran Squad. You also save 20 points doing that too, which is nice. Although their damage output isn't quite the same. We have a Company Weapon Lieutenant with Coronal Susurrant. We have a standard unit of 5 Jump Bank Intercessors, a standard Intercessor Squad, 9 Devastator Centurions, a unit of 6 and a unit of 3, all of those with las cannons and missile launchers, 2 Inceptor Squads, 1 unit of 3, 1 unit of 6, plus an Incursor Squad for early game Vanguard veterans with Inferno pistols for the captain to join. And then we have a Stormspeeder Thunderstrike, not to be outdone, so he can access +1 to wound for things like the Plasma Exterminator Inceptors to more concretely kill vehicles, especially with that +1 AP bonus that they can get. They can wound most vehicles on 4s, even without needing Oath of Moment, get, AP bonus, so they're coming in at AP4. They'll be able to kill most heavily armored things by themselves without needing Oath, and then you can Oath whatever the captain is going to go hit, because he does kind of require Oath of Moment to do serious damage with the Vanguard Veteran Squads plus their Inferno pistols. So, interesting build out of Shadowmark Talon. Nice to see some vehicles creeping in there, although a little bit non-standard from the more regular build. Now, moving on from there, let's talk about the Renegade Open 2025. One of the largest events of the weekend, ended up with 3 undefeated players. The winning one of that selection was Scott Blegan playing Dark Angels. And Dark Angels in not any detachment, but a Stormlance Task Force, the biker-focused detachment. This included Azrael, a combi weapon lieutenant, Lionel Johnson, a pair of Ravenwing command squads, one of them with Fainting Withdrawal, which allows you to shoot in the turn you fall back. Those Ravenwing units do have mass plasma talons, so their shooting attacks are actually fairly effective, and they can already fall back and charge thanks to the Stormlines Task Force attachment ability, so this guy lets them just fall back, operate normally. The other one with Hunter's Instincts, so we can deploy them out of reserve on the first battle round. We then have Samael as well. 2 Jump Back Assault Intercessor squads for some disruption, 2 Gladiator Lancers for some backline shooting. We do have an attachment for Azrael in the form of an Inner Circle Companion unit. And then we have an Outrider squad and 2 units of Ravenwing Black Knights. I think in this case, we're probably putting the Ravenwing command squads inside the Black Knights. Samael gets to go into the Outrider squad. He becomes an incredibly scary combatant when he is given the +1 damage from attaching to the Outriders. He comes in at base, strength 6, AP3, 2 damage. He has sustained hits 2, so he can fish against his Oath of Moment target and swing for strength 7, AP3, 3 damage, with potentially averaging somewhere around 9 or 10 hits if you get a couple of lucky sustains in there. And then you can also use the stratagem to lance him as well, so he's winning most vehicles on 4s and putting those high damage hits through. For relatively inexpensive investment, just the 3 Outriders plus Samael himself. Also interesting to see Lionel Johnson in there as well. He's actually probably a pretty scary inclusion because you're going to be forcing so many Ravenwing down your opponent's throat early. He can either rapid ingress in behind them or run in behind them, just ground pounding in order to threaten heroic interventions on things coming back into that unit. You can do things like potentially have him in the center of the battlefield, lone operative by something, by the combi weapon lieutenant potentially, reactive move units back to him, and then threaten a heroic intervention with fights first into whatever would charge into the units that are reactive moving. So you can ensure that the enemy has to to charge into that 6-inch aura from him, which can be incredibly scary. Now from there, we'll move on to the second place placer, Eric Olsen, running Chaos Demons. This was a demonic incursion with 5 greater demons, kind of the all-stars of the greater demon scene. Bellicor, an endless gift great and clean one, old Endless Ed himself, a Lord of Change with the Everstave to give a ranged platform to the army. It is a little bit difficult to play Chaos Demons without the ability to reach out past the front line of your opponent's army, so the Lord of Change helps that out quite a bit. We have Rodigus and Scarbrand in there as well. A bunch of smaller demons for utility, double Plague Bearers, which is becoming very common in order to add more OC2 OBSEC to the army, plus the ability to get +1 to charge out of Deep Strike makes these guys very good in the late game, stealing people's objectives and killing their utility units. We then have a Nurgling Swarm, 2 units of Fleshhounds for their up-down, and a Screamer unit for the onboard fast movement. Third place in the event was Tyler DeVries, who is running Adeptus Mechanicus, and kind of the Adeptus Mechanicus build right now, running Skitarii Hunter Cohort. I feel like this list vacillates between Halo Screed Battleclade or Skitarii Hunter Cohort, and it's just, you just decide whether or not you want to do a little bit more damage or you want to be a little bit harder to kill. If you want to be a little bit harder to kill, you play Skitarii Hunter Cohort. If you want to do a little bit more damage, you play Halo Screed Battleclade, and then you let her rip. In this case, we're running Belisarius Call, a Skitarii Marshal with Cantic Thrallnet, so we can apply both the Doctrina Imperatives to a unit, probably an Iron Strider Ballistari unit, so the army can go into Conqueror Imperative early to allow the more aggressive movement from the Infiltrators, the Sicarian Infiltrators, and then you can still put a Protector Imperative on your gun unit so you can get some work out of them. We have a pair of Skitarii Ranger units, 3 units of 3 Iron Strider Ballistari, all of them, 2 of them with Cognus Las Cannons, 1 of them with Autocannons, 2 units of 10 Taraxi Skystalkers, 1 unit of 5, as well as 3 units of Sicarian Infiltrators, 1 unit of Sicarian Ruststalkers. I think very similar, if not identical, to the list that Richard Seeger played in the World Championships as well. Pretty standard build, I think, for Adeptus Mechanicus. It does feel like that faction is very quickly becoming a kind of a mono list faction, where I think that's the most common one played for the foreseeable future. Until maybe we see a little bit of a change to the Sicarian units, I would probably expect, or maybe the Iron Strider Ballistari. Moving on from there, we could talk about the Gravel Pit number 4. There were 2 undefeated players here. Adeptus Custodes took second place, but it was won by Aiden Smalley running Death Guard. Death Guard list after my own heart. This is a Tallyband Summoners list. So the Nurgle detachment that gives the Nurgle demons the contingents of Nurgle when they are near Death Guard units, and otherwise they enhance the size of the Death Guard auras. We have a Lord of Contagion with Fell Harvester. This gives him +2 attack, so he hits like an absolute Mack truck. We then have a Lord of Virulence with Beckoning Blight, so he's going to be able to bring in Nurgle demons 6 inches away from enemies as long as they deploy near him rather than the normal 9 inches. We have a pair of Malignant Plaguecasters as well as Rodigus as a Nurgle demon. 2 units of Plague Bearers, so we can potentially drop the Lord of Virulence in out of Deep Strike, then project his Beckoning Blight aura, drop the Plague Bearers in front of them, and then make a 5-inch charge to steal objectives from people, which is absolutely incredibly spooky. And then obviously provide the Lord of Virulence buff to blast weapons like the Fetid Blow Drones that are also in the list. We then have a single unit of Plague Marines. So one of those Plague Casters is going to be by themselves. One of them could jump into the Plague Marine squad. We have a Chaos Rhino that can firing deck both of those Plague Casters out the top. 1 Beast of Nurgle, 1 Chaos Spawn unit for utility, 2 units of Death Shroud Terminators for the Terminator characters to hop into. A single standard Fleshmower Fetid Blow Drone, the melee version, plus 2 heavy launcher blow drones, a unit of 6 Nurglings, so we do Pestilent Pests, so we're going to be able to regenerate that unit for a command point once it's dead, another unit of 3 Nurglings, plus a 10-model Poxwalker unit for utility. I absolutely love this attachment. I think it's probably underplayed. The combination of being able to apply the sort of debuff effects from both Death Guard and Great Unclean Ones is a hugely powerful combination. Moving on from there, we have Orks at the Crossed Sword War at the Westward number 9. Tom Godfrey won that event 5-0 with an Ork War Horde. Mostly, I think, fairly standard build from Orks here. We have a pair of Beast Bosses, one of them with Cunning but Brutal, a Big Mech with Follow Me Lads to attach into Gaskell Thraka to give the additional movement, 2 standard War Bosses, a pair of Beast Naga Boys for the Beast Bosses to join, a Big Boy Squad for Gaskell Thraka, 4 trucks to carry around the smaller units. This includes 2 Break-A Boys units that the War Bosses can hop into to crack heavy armor, 2 Flash Gits units to clear out enemy utility, plus 2 units of Gretchen, a commando unit, and a Storm Boys unit for some additional utility. Pretty standard stuff. I don't think there's much else to talk about here. This build for Orks has been pretty classic as we've been kind of developing this metagame. Moving on from there, we can talk about Tyranids at the Alba GT. Marek Vlinka went undefeated with an invasion fleet. This one kind of like a bit of a throwback to Tyranid lists of yore. It is running a Brood Lord, which is becoming incredible, I would say consistently more widely played as the format is kind of developing. Just having a big melee beatstick that can clear out the early game, or use Adrenal Surge plus a massive number of attacks with rerolls to get like mass lethal or sustained in the late game against vehicles and stuff, gives you a unit that can relatively reliably clear heavy armor if you are able to get all those buffs off on it. We have a standard Hive Tyrant plus a Neuro Tyrant. The Hive Tyrant's going to be applying lethal hit to your nearby ranged attacks, which is going to be huge. Neuro Tyrant there is going to be able to join a Zoanthrope unit. So we're going to have another relatively consistent anti-tank damage dealer. 2 disruption pieces in the form of a Gargoyle unit plus a Hormigaunt unit to keep enemies off balance on objectives. Those, in addition to the Gene Stealers, are going to be able to disrupt control of the enemy expansion objective over a couple turns and hopefully keep their score down, while Tyranids use their armored units to try to bully the midboard. We then have a Biovore for some scoring, 3 Exocrines, 3 Maleceptors, the 10 Gene Stealers to go with the Broodlord, a pair of Neuroelectors for utility, and potentially to get +1 to wound on the Shadow in the Warp turn, plus the Zoanthrope unit I mentioned before. So like I said, kind of a blast from the past. Maleceptor plus Exocrine was a very classic combination, occasionally with Pyrovores in there to strip cover from the beginning of the index, essentially, because the resilience of Maleceptors was very, very impressive, and then Exocrines could fire sort of over top. The Maleceptors would tank all the damage, and the Exocrines would clear out enemies. The strength characteristics on the ranged attacks are relatively low, but that is offset by the Hive Tyrant. And then you also have the rapid regeneration for the 5+ Feel No Pain on the Maleceptors to try to compound that resilience. And a lot of times you're just pushing those guys up onto the objectives, forcing your opponent to move forward and engage. That allows you to counterattack with the Gene Stealers and open up their anti-tank for shooting by the Exocrines. The Maleceptors will typically die over the course of the game, but that allows the Hive Tyrant and the Exocrines sort of roll over the remainder of the army. Moving on from there, we have Drukhari, also undefeated at the Canis Belli War, in addition to Astra Militarum going undefeated at this event. This was Stefan Brotzer, who played Drukhari in not a Spectacle of Spite, not a Reaper's Wager, but in fact a Realspace Raid. This is the detachment that gains you pain tokens for the combination of Archon, Succubus, and Homunculus models that you begin the game with. So you are going to have a larger selection of pain tokens than you would normally, which is an incredibly powerful effect given how important pain tokens are for the consistency of the Drukhari army. Not being able to use a lot of your empowerment effects by having low pain tokens early does make it potentially disastrous if Drukhari are forced to engage with you on the very beginning, from the very beginning of the turn, or the very beginning of the game, because they actually don't have the resources typically to be able to contend with a lot of very aggressive armies. In this case, we're playing an Archon with Labyrinthine Cunning, so we're going to be able to spend pain tokens to gain command points. We have Lady Malice, Lilith Hesperanx, and a Succubus with Eye of Spite. That gives you +1 attack and AP, and an additional empowerment effect that allows you to improve the AP and attacks by 1. Although I don't believe it's actually empowerment. I think you just spend a pain token. So I believe that there is the potential that you do have to spend in addition to the standard empowerment. Although I don't believe that the Succubus has any empowerment effects in the fight phase, so it wouldn't really matter anyway. Moving on from there, we have Cabalite Warrior units plus Witches, 2 Venoms, a pair of Chronos, so a relatively resilient brick of Chronos. We can use Insensible to pain on these things in order to get -1 damage, so they are actually kind of legitimately hard to kill if you have the command points floating, and there is a command point generator in the detachment, so we will theoretically have a lot of command points to spend. We have a pair of Hellion units, just 5 in each of those, 1 Incubi squad for Lady Malice to hop into and give her sustained or lethal, a Mandrake unit for utility, and then a bunch of shooting, 2 units of Scourges, both of them running Haywire Blasters. That's because we're taking Dark Lances from Ravagers. We have 2 Ravagers, each of them taking 3 Dark Lances, plus a Void Raven Bomber with Void Lances and missiles. Nice thing here is that we do have access to a 2CP Fire and Fade. Again, the detachment is going to struggle to spend those command points, but it is going to have that generator thanks to Labyrinthine Cunning. So hopefully it will have consistent access to command points. And you can do the Fire and Fade with both the Scourges automatically, plus at least one of the other units, so potentially a Ravager jumping out and shooting and then ducking back. So you do have relatively consistent range damage output from a long distance without having to expose any of your guns. And then you have a ton of these little individual units that do have relatively reasonable melee characteristics between things like the Hellions and the up-powered Succubi. So the Lilith Hesperax plus the Eye of Spite Succubus can do some serious damage. We do have 2 Witch units to jump those into, so they threaten pretty far. They have a lot of anti-infantry attacks, so they can clear out utility squads incredibly efficiently. And then you can kind of use the Death by 1,000 Cuts method to use things like the Lances from the Hellions, shooting from the Scourges and the Ravagers, plus Void Raven Bombs and Lances to try to sort of pick out the heavier armor. Now, moving on from that, it is going to be our last event of the weekend, this being the AZ 40K League Fall Championship. This is won by Travis Finnell, who is running a Deathwatch and a Black Spear Task Force. And this is a bizarre version of Deathwatch. It is kind of the progression of some of the Deathwatch builds we've been seeing more recently, because we've been seeing Deathwatch edged more and more towards this high model count version of the list that's taking mass kill teams, just tons and tons of kill teams. In this case, we're running only 4 characters. 2 of them are Combi Weapon Lieutenants. So between 2 Combi Weapon Lieutenants plus 2 units of Incursors, that's basically 100% of the Army's utility. That's about it. Those 2 lone operatives, we can hold 1 on the back objective, we can hold 1 on the expansion objective, and just hope that those get held for the entire game. And then Incursors can go apply hitbox to things. We have a Judiciary with Beacon Angelus, so he gets his free rapid ingress and deep strike. We then also have a Watchmaster with the Tome of the Acticlades and a Deathwatch veteran unit. So the Judiciary is going to jump into the Deathwatch veterans with 4 Thunderhammers. That allows you to, as your opponent pushes in to try to clear out your kill teams, you can rapid ingress, then heroically intervene, get a fight first, very strong fight first activation into that enemy. The interesting thing too is that if you have the command points to spend, you can rapid ingress, and if your opponent chooses not to trigger the heroic intervention and doesn't charge, you can just site-to-site teleport that unit back into reserve and threaten the same thing next turn. And you can just constantly do that over the course of the game. So it basically prevents, at least once per game, prevents any damage from happening to one of your kill team units. Speaking of kill team units, we have a ton of them. So there's 10 Deathwatch veterans with that Judiciary, as I mentioned. There are 30 Fortis kill team members. So 3 units of 10, all of those have the requisite Venger and Super Crank launchers inside them. So we have, in that case, 6 indirect fire platforms inside the combination of these Fortis kill teams, plus pretty solid number of bolters, grenade launchers, and plasma attacks as well. We then have 30 Indomitor kill team units on top of that. So in this case, the loadout's interesting because unlike the Fortis kill teams, which all have a consistent loadout, the Indomitor kill teams, 2 of them are running Boltstorm Gauntlets and Multi-Meltas, so aggressors and eradicators inside the Indomitor kill team. One of them is a pure heavy intercessor loadout. So it's all heavy Deathwatch heavy bolters, heavy bolt rifles. So those are the 2 and 3 damage varieties of the bolt weapons. They get lethal hits. And then they also get that strength bonus when they target the closest eligible. You can use Kraken rounds to improve the range of those attacks to 30 and 40, 36 and 42 inches, I believe is the number, in addition to improving their AP characteristics. So you can be firing mass, strength 7, lethal hit, AP 3 multi-damage attacks from a super long distance. So these guys can cut weird lines of sight and basically just play entirely around the edges of the board. Try to use site-to-site teleport to gain deep strike, pop up, cut one line onto a utility unit 30 inches away, blow it out of the water, and then continuously deal damage with your Fortis kill teams. That forces your opponent to move forward. They may even need to move forward to deal with that Indomitor kill team. If they try to do so in melee, you get to rapid ingress in the Beacon Angelus guy, or if they don't, and they are staying, at distance, as long as you can use the indirect fire and the Indomitor kill team, the Bolter Indomitor kill team to clear out their utility units, you can then drop in the big Indomitor kill teams, the Malta-equipped Indomitor kill teams, to punch their armored units with the +2 strength and, units dropping into Melta range thanks to Kraken rounds for additional range to get extra distance on your Melta damage. Then if they come in to try to counterattack those guys, you get the Beacon Angelus drop on them too. So this army plays, imagine like a well-oiled machine. Basically, you're just going to use those long-range guns to pick away at your opponent and annoy them into coming into the middle of the table so you can counterattack them with just a literal horde of 70 kill team infantry. This army, I guess in total, not including characters, is running 80 Space Marines on the table, no vehicles. Just 80 Space Marines basically running at your opponent. Absolutely nuts. But it's really cool to see, and it's cool to see that there is a little bit of variety inside Deathwatch. This army is actually fascinating, and I will remind, this event actually went, I think, over rounds, and Travis actually ended up going 7-0 in order to win this one. So a very consistently high-performing army as well. And with that is the best armies in 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section what you think, which one your favorite is. Thanks to everyone who supports the channel, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming. And big thanks to Frontline Gaming for sponsoring the video.